It's code red for humanity. The alarm bells are deafening. Wildfires, floods, and hurricanes. Extreme climate events warn of impending doom. Is the world heading towards a climate catastrophe? Watch WION's Climate Tracker weekdays at 12 p.m. GMT, 5:30 p.m. IST.
You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert.
You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time.
Show us your faithfulness. Show us your trustworthiness. Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma. Let's get started. It is the 8th International Yoga Day, a day that celebrates India's gift to the world. Yoga, the practice, promotes physical health and mental peace. But in the Maldives, yoga was met with protests. The official event was disrupted by a violent mob carrying flags and sticks. They chased and attacked participants. They beat up the instructors. They said yoga is against Islam. But is it? Last we checked, yoga has nothing to do with religion. So why is a section of the Maldives up in arms against yoga? Also, who instigated this violent mob? We'll discuss all of this and more, and we'll try to look for answers on the show tonight. That's how the world celebrated Yoga Day, with peace and calm. Now let me show you how the Maldives celebrated it. The main event was a meditation hour. It was organized at the National Football Stadium in Malé. Dozens of people attended it. They had a special attire, dedicated instructors. It was a full-fledged event. 3 official bodies were involved in organizing it: the Indian Diplomatic Mission, the Youth and Sports Ministry of the Maldives, and the United Nations. It doesn't get more official than that. But let me show you what happened halfway into the event. Take a look. Nothing and nobody was spared. Yoga practitioners were chased by men with flags and sticks. They thrashed instructors. They even destroyed the food organized at the stadium. It was a violent and hateful outburst. The question is why? Well, here is the official reason. Islamists claim yoga is against their religious principles, that yoga is anti-Islam. Their favorite excuse is the Surya Namaskar. You see, in Islam, worshipping the sun is heretic. It's a big no. And that is used as a reason to condemn yoga. It's always been a polarizing issue in the Maldives. The Orthodox Muslims do not support it, but the government does. Having said that, there are 2 points to note here. 1, yoga has nothing to do with religion. Any instructor or practitioner will tell you that. And 2, today's mob was not just religious, it was political as well. Let's talk about the first factor. How exactly do you define yoga? Well, here's what the United Nations says. Yoga is an ancient principle, ancient physical, mental and spiritual practice that originated in India. The word yoga derives from Sanskrit and means to join or to unite, symbolizing the union of body and consciousness. Nothing about religion, nothing about gods. It's a physical and spiritual practice, one that the world has embraced. Today, there are 300 million yoga practitioners worldwide. The industry is worth around $80 billion. Of course, India has capitalized on it, not as a religious tool, but as a soft power tool. And for the record, Muslim nations also supported this campaign by India. Time for a short history lesson. The United Nations adopted International Yoga Day back in 2014. More than 170 countries supported that resolution. Guess how many of them were Muslim countries? 48. 48 Muslim countries supported Yoga Day. To give you some context, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, has 56 members. 48 of them backed yoga, including the Maldives. If yoga was indeed anti-Islam, why would so many Muslim countries support it? Also, the event in Malé was not compulsory. The Maldives is, after all, a democratic country. If you want to participate, you can. If you do not want to participate, you can stay away. But attacking peaceful citizens cannot be justified. Which brings us to the second point. Perhaps this was not about religion at all. Perhaps it was all political. Reports say the Maldives' main opposition party could be behind this attack, and frankly, it wouldn't be surprising. The main opposition party is the PPM, the Progressive Party of the Maldives. Do you know what's their biggest campaign slogan? India out. That's their campaign, India out. We've told you about this before. It is spearheaded by this man, former President Abdullah Yameen. Throughout his presidency, he pushed the Maldives closer to China, and now he's eyeing a comeback. No solid policies, no constructive campaign ideas, just one baseless slogan, and that is India out. Yameen's party claims India has too much strategic influence in the Maldives, that Indian troops could soon be deployed there. He's given no proof of it, but the campaign has since been banned by the government, their government, in the Maldives. And these pictures should tell you why. This violent mob reportedly had help from Yameen's party. You see those flags? Apparently, they were provided by the opposition. If true, it means the India Out campaign has evolved. It is not just political anymore. It is violent and communal. How is the government of the Maldives responding to all of this? The president has ordered a police inquiry. He has promised swift action against the attackers. He's also reached out to the Home. We also, in fact, reached out to the Home Ministry. Their assessment was quite similar. Listen to what they said. We believe that this act of violence is aimed at achieving a political end, and the involvement of the political opposition in this is worrying. It's a dangerous cocktail, religion and politics. Maybe the police will catch today's culprits. Maybe the Yameen camp will be implicated, but the eventual solution has to be political. The Maldives' government must clarify India's role in their country, because right now valuable goodwill is being lost, and chances are this defamation campaign is going to continue. Because next year is election year. The Maldives will be electing their next president in 2023. So the attacks on India, the attacks on yoga, all of it will be more acute in the coming months. Also, today's events should not discourage India. The government must keep promoting yoga, keep pushing its secular credentials, because yoga is not just an Indian practice. It is India's gift to the world. Yoga also represents the power of India's ancient civilization. It was weakened when British colonized India. The British colonizers extracted India's wealth. They starved Bengal to feed London. Similarly, Africans were taken as slaves to North America. Colonial extraction enabled the Western industrial age. As colonies, India and Africa supported the development of the West. India and Africa are no longer colonies. They're independent nations and regions. But the West is still trying to enforce colonization, this time of a different kind, carbon colonization. Europe has announced a shift to coal. The same Europe that could not stop lecturing others on the use of coal, the same Europe that kept browbeating developing countries on climate goals, has very conveniently announced its shift to coal because they need energy. Let's start with what happened in Germany. Earlier this month, a key meeting was held in Bonn. It was the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Representatives from nearly 200 countries and regions were there. European diplomats were also present. They faced two demands: cut down emissions and provide financing to help developing countries tackle climate change. Did the Europeans agree? The answer is no, they did not. In fact, they want more coal. And they want it from the developing world. The war in Ukraine has exposed Europe's vulnerabilities. The EU sanctioned Russia, so Russia hit back by cutting gas supplies to Europe. And now Europe is looking for coal. Germany has fired up its coal plants again. The Netherlands has removed limits on production from such plants, from coal plants. Denmark could do the same. Italy has declared a state of alert on energy. Italian energy plants have been hoarding coal for months now. They might soon put it to use. Why does Europe need more coal? Well, they're suffering a heat wave as we speak. They need more electricity for their cooling systems. So power consumption has gone up. But where will this power come from? Europe gets 40% of its gas from Russia, but that supply is no longer guaranteed. Russia is already cutting exports to Europe. Russian state giant Gazprom supplies to Europe. It sends gas through the Nord Stream pipeline to Germany, and from Germany, this gas is distributed to the rest of the continent, the rest of Europe. But since last week, the supply has not been steady. In the last 7 days, Russia has cut gas exports to Europe by more than 50%, 50. And so they're switching to coal, the Europeans. What happens to their climate goals? Europe has money, so it can tilt the playing field. Let me explain how. The EU wants to phase out coal-fired plants by 2030. So plants in Europe have to be shut down. Then where will they get their coal from? Outside, from the developing world. They will supply coal to Europe. In fact, they already are. Colombia is doing that. It's one of the countries. In March, Europe imported 1.3 million tons of coal from Colombia. Colombian exports to the EU have increased by over 47% this year. South Africa is another candidate. It shipped nothing to Europe in March last year, but this year it has sent 287,000 tons of coal. The United States, Australia, Indonesia, they're all supplying coal to Europe, but even together they may not be able to meet the continent's growing demand. These countries have hit their production limits. Plus, there's another problem. European banks won't finance Russian coal purchases. They're reluctant to pay for Russian supplies, so energy companies in Europe have very limited options. They have to buy more coal from the developing world so that Europe can survive the heat wave. Again, what about their climate promises? Shutting down your coal plants and buying from outside hardly solves the problem. In the past, Europe never tired of telling this to the world. Extreme weather is causing a loss of $520 billion every year. It is pushing 26 million people into poverty every year. 23 rich countries are responsible for half of the historical emissions. Most of them are European. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Belgium, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom. Europe has only 7% of the world's population, but it still uses almost 20% of the planet's resources. I could go on, but here's the crux of it. If Europe wants coal, it can buy it. If Europe wants coal, it can keep its plant running. Because European air conditioners must keep running. When developing countries say they cannot stop using coal, they're asked to shut down factories. They're told to ration coal. When developing countries demand climate compensation and financing, they're denied. And this is classic European hypocrisy, still treating the developing world as their colonies and bending rules to suit themselves. Speaking of compensation, railway workers in the UK are demanding a pay hike. And it's a very big story there. They've launched a nationwide strike. It's the biggest strike in 30 years in the UK. It has all but paralyzed the country's rail network. Most railway stations are either shut or have partially suspended services. Labour unions say the strike is just the beginning. It could soon engulf almost every sector in the UK. Teachers, nurses, barristers, they could all stage a walkout. What is the British government doing to stop this from happening? And what does this mean for Boris Johnson's political future? Here's a report.
This is the King's Cross Station, one of the busiest railway terminals in the UK. More than 300,000 commuters use it daily. But today, this is how it looks. There's no rush, no panic, just a handful of trains and passengers. Why? Because of a national rail strike. The biggest strike in 30 years. More than 40,000 railway workers in Britain have staged a walkout. Cleaners, signallers, maintenance workers, station staff, all of them are on strike. Their actions have brought the UK's rail network to a standstill. The worst hit is the London Tube. It has suspended most of its services. For how long? 3 days. Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. Railway unions say they will allow only 20% of the services to be run on these days. Why? Because they want better pay and more jobs. You see, inflation in the UK has hit a 40-year high. Prices of food and fuel have risen by 10%. This has led to a major cost of living crisis. The workforce is struggling to make ends meet. Railway workers are the first to protest. They're asking for a pay hike, a hike they say is long overdue.
Some of our members have not had a pay rise for the third anniversary now. We can resolve that if we've got a proper negotiating framework, but the fact is that Grant Shapps, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are dictating the terms of this dispute.
What is the British government's response? The Transport Secretary is calling the strike a political stunt.
This is a stunt, which I'm afraid you're falling for, by the unions and the Labour Party. The Labour Party who won't even condemn these strikes today.
The Prime Minister is calling it an unnecessary aggravation.
OK, Cabinet, good morning. I want to say something about the rail strikes that are today causing significant disruption and inconvenience up and down the country, making it more difficult for people to get to work, risking people's appointments, making it more difficult for kids to sit exams, all sorts of unnecessary aggravation this is going to cause.
As leaders pass the buck, citizens continue to suffer.
Well, normally I obviously live in Southfield. It's about 10-12 minutes walk from Southfield. So basically I had to walk from waiting so many buses, they're all full up. So basically I walked all the way through to Putney.
The strike has been planned for 3 days, but the chaos may not end with it. Labour unions say this is just the beginning. That a long summer of discontent lies ahead. Teachers, medics, waste disposal workers, even barristers, they could all move towards industrial action if the British government doesn't act. As it is, the signs of the strike spilling over are overwhelming. These images are from the Heathrow airport. It shows suitcases piled up in the main terminal. Over 30 flights have been cancelled. 5,000 passengers have been left stranded. This chaos is being linked to the rail strike. None of this looks good on Boris Johnson. After a lobbying scandal, the Partygate, the 10D refurbishment drama, and a mutiny within his own party, he's now facing a nationwide railway strike, one that could snowball into an all-encompassing national protest. These challenges are more than a slap on the wrist. They indicate how Britain may be falling out of love with Boris Johnson.
Headlines about politics, petrol prices, protests, they often bury stories about people. For over a week now, the people of Assam have been suffering. Assam is a northeastern state in India. This is where it is located on the map. The state is home to 36 million people. As we speak, Assam is struggling to cope with floods. 33 of its 35 districts have been hit. 4.7 million people have been affected. At least 82 people have lost their lives. 3.3 million animals have been affected. At least 5,000 of them have been washed away. More than 113,000 hectares of cultivated land has been inundated. So have 3,000 villages. Trains have been cancelled. Many parts of the state have been cut off. This is what Assam looks like today. In the capital, Dispur, roads have disappeared. Some 150 kilometers from the capital, people are using a rope to cross the Solent River. 2 policemen were washed away by floodwaters while rescuing stranded people. Let me show you this house. This is what it looks like. There's water everywhere, and this is the story everywhere.
Floodwater has inundated our house. This has created a lot of issues for people here.
There is water everywhere. Around 6 to 7 kilometers of the area is flooded. People don't have any place to live, and they have to go to higher grounds as this whole area is flooded.
People have lost their homes. They've been forced to move to higher ground. Many have taken refuge in shelter. Some 200,000 people are currently living in shelter camps. In many parts of the state, food is running out. So is drinking water. On the 19th of June, a boat was crossing a river to sell milk and vegetables. It capsized with 9 people on board. This woman is cooking food on a cot because she is out of options.
It has been 1 week since I have been cooking in such conditions. The authorities do not check our whereabouts.
And yet this is not a one-off year. Assam suffers floods every year. There are 10 major rivers flowing through the state. Brahmaputra is the largest. It is also one of the biggest in Asia. The river flows from Tibet, goes through India before entering Bangladesh. Then there is the Barak River. Over the decades, people have built their houses around these rivers. They've profited from the fertile land. Minor floods have happened every couple of years. They've enhanced the soil's fertility and people have not complained. But now these floods have become major. The rivers have become flood-prone. And Assam has become one of the most flood-prone states in this country. 40% of the state is at risk of flooding. This is 4 times the national mark. Assam has nearly 10% of India's flood-prone land. How did this happen? Let's start with climate change. Today, even on a normal day, the Brahmaputra has more water than usual. This is because the glacier in Tibet is melting. Come early monsoon, there are torrential rains in these states. Then there are neighboring hill states, Arunachal Pradesh and Meghalaya. When it rains in these states, the water flows into Assam. And before you know it, the river is flowing above the danger mark and it does not take too long for it to breach its banks. The muddy banks have been eroded by decades of human activity. 4.27 lakh hectares of the state has been eroded by floods since 1950. All of these factors make Assam's rivers more prone to flooding. So every time the Brahmaputra or any of these rivers breaks the banks, Assam ends up looking like this. In 2021, this was the picture. Also in 2020.
The situation had been a little grim because there had been heavy rainfall since the past few days, and the whole of Assam is inundated, and the quantum depends, it varies from place to place.
Today, every river in Assam is flowing above the danger mark. This year, the situation is especially bad. Many say it's the worst they've seen in their lifetime. Our reporter has been on ground for a few days now, telling the story of some of the most affected areas. He sent us a quick update using a car headlight because the flood has snapped the power supply.
The overall flood situation in Indian northeastern state of Assam is very bad. Around 48 lakh people were affected by the floods. 10 people have died in last 24 hours. Indian Army and NDRF are working together with the state forces.
Well, you can blame nature and climate change for these floods. Who do you blame for the casualties? It's not that the flood is killing these people. It's the lack of preparedness. In 1980, a Brahmaputra board was set up. It was to come up with measures to control floods. The board suggested that dams and reservoirs be built in the state. What happened then? Critics say while the dams were constructed, they were not built keeping the state's ecology in mind. You see, what Assam needs urgently is an integrated flood forecasting, warning and response system. In 2014, India signed an agreement with China. China agreed to provide crucial flood data on the Brahmaputra. This was in exchange for $8.2 million every year. But can India continue to rely on China for something so crucial? India must build its own capabilities, its own models for flood protection and prediction, rather. People need to be warned well in advance. If required, they need to be rehabilitated for good. The government has to do all it can to put an end to this annual mayhem. It's Assam today. It could be Arizona tomorrow. That's the thing about climate change. It affects every single part of the world. You could say the same about the current economic crisis. Every single country is affected, but some more than others. Tonight, we are focusing on Singapore. Food is more than just sustenance in that part of the world. Street food, fine dining, traditional cuisine, everything sells in Singapore. But here's an interesting fact. That same Singapore is facing an acute food crisis. Let me tell you why. Singapore is a tiny island in the Pacific. There is no space to grow food grains or livestock. The result? Almost 90% of its food is imported, and that too from more than 170 countries. Imagine that, 170 different supply chains. The war in Ukraine has affected most of them. So like elsewhere, inflation is rising in Singapore too. Food prices were up 4.1% in April. The overall inflation is between 4.5% to 5.5%. Now I know what you're thinking. That's it? 4.1 is nothing compared to the rates in America or Canada or Turkey. And numerically, you're right. But let me add some context here. In Singapore, inflation always hovers around 2%. That is the historical average, 2%. So compared to that, 4.1% is a lot, which is why the government has announced a relief package. How much money are we talking about? Nearly 1.1 billion US dollars. That's how much Singapore will spend on inflation relief. Now, most of the package is directed at low-income families. This includes direct payments, rebate on utilities, funding for small businesses and subsidies for key industries. Singapore is among the few countries to announce such a package. Most of them have passed the buck to central banks. Central banks are betting on interest hikes to solve the inflation problem. Why is that? Because such relief packages have a downside. They could end up adding to the inflation. Let me explain how that happens. Inflation happens when there is too much money in the economy, when cash supply is too high. That was the case during the pandemic years. Every country was announcing stimulus packages. The G7 alone spent $8 trillion. India spent around $300 million. All of this money added to the cash supply. And this is the end result, higher inflation. In this situation, if you announce more stimulus, you could add to the problem. Basically, you're putting more money in the economy. So why is Singapore doing it? Because their coffers are overflowing. You see, most countries dig into their reserves to fund relief packages. Singapore is not doing that. They are using their excess revenue from last year. So the reserves remain unchanged. The money supply remains unchanged, but people have more money in their pocket. Singapore can do that because they had an excellent 2021. Higher revenue, lesser spending. But not every country can afford that. If you do not have excess revenue, you will have to dip into your reserves. And if you dip into your reserves, inflation will rise. That is the dilemma for governments. Does that mean our leaders are helpless? Well, not quite. In the United States, Joe Biden is grappling with an interesting proposal, a tax holiday for big oil. Right now, gasoline is taxed at 18.3% per gallon. Pause that, and the prices will fall. The logic is pretty simple. Taxes add to the overall price of any commodity. If you cut that tax, the price will fall. Could this solve overall inflation worldwide? Well, it will certainly help. But tax cuts alone will not be enough. Take India's example. In the month of May, India cut fuel taxes to pre-pandemic levels. Did inflation come down? Quite the opposite. India's wholesale inflation touched a 2-decade high. So tax cuts may help, but not alone. They must be coupled with other tools like interest hikes, subsidies, wage controls. And don't forget the most important rule. Do not overdo it. Because if you do, you will choke economic growth. Right now, things are heading in that direction. A recession is looking more and more likely now. Goldman Sachs has released a new forecast for the US economy. And this is what it says, a 30% chance of recession in 2023. Their forecast was 15%. But after the Federal Reserve's record intervention, the outlook has gotten worse. So governments have got their work cut out for them. On the one hand, rising inflation. If you don't give people relief, there will be a backlash. And backlash is always bad politics. On the other hand, the risk of a recession. Navigating this crisis requires deft policies. It requires governments to listen to the experts. Because good politics is almost always bad economics. Who knows this better than the people of Sri Lanka? They elected the Rajapaksas to power expecting better political reforms. What did they get in return? The worst financial crisis in their history. A massive shortage of food, fuel, medicines. It's been more than 2 months. The situation is not getting better. The shortages persist. The reserves are running out. Sri Lanka has been forced to turn to the IMF once again. A 10-member delegation of the International Monetary Fund has arrived in Colombo. They're talking about a bailout. And while all of this is on, the Sri Lankan government is also trying to curtail the powers of their president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. On Monday, the Lankan cabinet passed the 21st amendment to its constitution. It's an amendment that could reduce the Lankan presidency to a ceremonial position. Here's what it means.
They once called him the Terminator, a leader who ruled with an iron fist. Today, they're calling him a dead man walking, a leader losing his grip on power, courtesy of a new constitutional amendment. It will clip Gotabaya Rajapaksa's powers. We are talking about the 21st Amendment to Sri Lanka's constitution. It was passed by the Sri Lankan cabinet on Monday. The aim was to empower the parliament over the executive. In other words, curtail Gotabaya Rajapaksa's power as president. This amendment will bring three big changes. 1. Enhance the parliament's role in governing Sri Lanka. 2. Empower the Constitutional Council to make appointments. Earlier, the president had that power. And 3. Restrict the president's power to dismiss cabinet members. To put it simply, this amendment will reduce the Sri Lankan presidency to a ceremonial position. But it hasn't been implemented yet. For that, it will have to be approved by the Sri Lankan parliament. At least 2/3 of the parliamentarians need to vote in its favor. This is a major political reform in Sri Lanka. It comes at a time when a 10-member IMF delegation is in Colombo. It is discussing a possible bailout. These talks are crucial. Sri Lanka is days away from running out of fuel. Its foreign reserves are nearly gone. It's unable to import food and medicine. Plus, it has to pay back $5 billion of debt every year until 2026. At a time like this, Colombo hopes the IMF visit will yield some dividends. Sri Lanka needs a bailout desperately. Public discontent is mounting. Thousands of citizens are on the streets. They are protesting against chronic shortages. Global bodies are trying to pitch in. The United Nations has outlined a plan to raise $47 million in assistance for the next 4 months. The World Food Programme is distributing food vouchers to thousands of pregnant women. The International Monetary Fund says it wants to help too. But the assistance depends on how well Colombo executes the IMF's recommendations. Chief among them is renegotiating its Chinese debts. Now we know that China is also providing financial aid to Colombo. But on debt, there is no relief. China has neither extended debt repayment deadlines nor even reduced interest rates on loans. Bureau Report. WION. World is one.
Do you know how many seasons Israel has? The internet will tell you 2. But the real answer is 1. The only season in Israel is election season. I know it sounds like a joke, but Israeli citizens are living through it. On Monday, the ruling coalition dropped a surprise. They will be dissolving the parliament next week, which means Israel will have yet another election, their 5th one in less than 4 years. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett says he tried everything to save the government, but in the end, dissolving it was the better option. Listen in.
In recent weeks, we have done everything that could be done to preserve this government, which in our eyes, its continued existence is in the national interest. Believe me, we have turned every stone upside down, not for our sake, but for the sake of our beautiful country, for you, the citizens of the State of Israel.
Bennett's government had just completed 1 year in power. His coalition was supposed to be the big change, the post-Netanyahu political class. So what happened? He lost his numbers in parliament. Bennett's coalition already had a wafer-thin majority. They had 62 seats in a House of 120. 3 coalition lawmakers abandoned him in the last 2 months, so the government was down to 59 seats. It became a minority government. And watching from the sidelines was Benjamin Netanyahu. He could have called a no-confidence motion. He could have toppled Bennett any time. Instead, he chose to slowly bleed the government. But on Monday, Bennett had enough. Instead of waiting to be toppled, he took the initiative. Next week, the parliament will be officially dissolved, and in October, elections will be held. But here's the catch. Naftali Bennett will not be prime minister until then. He will give way to his coalition partner, Yair Lapid. It was part of the deal they struck last year. If the parliament is dissolved, Lapid takes over as caretaker prime minister. And what a time to take charge. US President Joe Biden is visiting Israel next month. Tensions with Iran are rising every day. And opinion polls are predicting another fractured mandate. And if that happens, Lapid could remain prime minister for a long time. And he's already got his plan sorted.
A word about what comes next. Even if we are going into elections in a few months, the challenges we face will not wait. We need to tackle the cost of living, wage the campaign against Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah, and stand against the forces that are threatening to turn Israel into a non-democratic country.
This crisis could be an opportunity for Benjamin Netanyahu. His Likud party is still the largest bloc in parliament. His brand of politics is still immensely popular. But Netanyahu will have to make changes. This is the era of coalitions. Even Netanyahu needs partners to form government. In fact, Israel has always had a coalition government. And those partners that Netanyahu wants could have different ideologies. Take Bennett's coalition, for instance. It has a hard-right faction, an Arab party, and also some leftist lawmakers. But let's leave the politics aside for the moment. Let's talk about the logistics. This will be Israel's 5th election in 3.5 years. And that's 3.5 years of political uncertainty. How long can this keep up? At what point do Israeli voters start losing faith? Well, some of them already have.
I'm not happy. I think the country needs stability, and having elections every several months or even every year is not good.
I think that the election is just a waste of time and a waste of money, and I don't think that something will change now in the political field.
Exactly the problem. Every country needs a stable government to function, especially a country like Israel. It is grappling with multiple challenges simultaneously. The unrest in the West Bank, Iran's growing nuclear threat, the pressure from Arab neighbors. And to tackle all of this, Israel needs a stable government, not elections every 5 months. And this time, in fact, the stakes are even higher because tensions are rising in West Asia, the latest theater in the Persian Gulf. US and Iranian warships had a near miss on Monday. Here's what American officials say. 3 Iranian vessels zipped past their ships at high speed. They came within 50 yards of each other. One miscalculation and they could have crashed. Such incidents are becoming quite frequent in the Persian Gulf. In late April, there was another one. US warships fired warning shots at Iranian vessels. Washington claims the Iranian ships were harassing them. Now, all of this is happening in the high seas, so we cannot verify them. But here's what we can say. The trajectory is not looking good. Such small skirmishes often lead to a wider conflict. And those considerations could also influence the elections in Israel. Just think about it. If the conflict escalates, Israelis will have to choose. Lapid and Bennett offer them continuity. Netanyahu offers them experience. He is the longest-serving Israeli prime minister ever. Whoever wins will be hoping for a decisive mandate. If not, maybe it's time to rethink Israel's political system, perhaps tweak the election process. From Israel's problems, let's shift our focus to the mysteries of space. A new discovery on Mars has left scientists baffled. NASA's Perseverance rover has been moving around Mars. It has come across some rocks. They could have formed more than 3 billion years ago, and these rocks could hold clues to ancient life on the red planet. Here's more.
They say a picture sometimes is worth 1,000 words. This one has certainly got the world talking. It is from Mars. What you see are 2 stones. They sit on top of each other in perfect balance. The rock above the boulder is about the size of a bowling ball. They could be as old as 3.6 billion years. This was found in an area called the Hog Wallow Flats. There are more nearby. This one looks like a decrepit hunt crawling out of the ground. Now take a look at this patch of land. It resembles a strip of bacon. NASA's Perseverance rover has captured these sites. It is on a mission to find some clues of ancient life. Already the rover has come up with some interesting insights, like these balancing rocks. Scientists also call them reverse seismometers. They can be used to learn more about the seismic history of Mars. By looking at these rocks, experts can figure out if the red planet has ever felt something like an earthquake or a Marsquake. If these rocks did move in any way, it is a sign of Marsquake. If they are perfectly balanced, then the ground hasn't moved enough to knock them over. How did these rocks form in the first place? Scientists have a theory. They believe groundwater trickled through them a long time ago. Billions of years ago, winds could have hardened these structures. There is evidence to suggest that water flowed through Mars. These rocks could answer one of the biggest mysteries of space. Did life exist on Mars? NASA's Perseverance rover is studying the Jezero crater on the planet. Scientists believe that there was a lake in this region. It may have been home to microbial life. Bureau Report. WION World is One.
We end tonight's show with a story that affects all of us. Doesn't matter if you're watching us from Sri Lanka or Singapore or India, the UK, Europe, the Maldives, or you're working on that mission to Mars. This story is about all of us. It's a story about work. How many of you sulked a little before going to work today? How many of you woke up not wanting to go to work at all? How many of you are currently at work and feeling stressed? I want you to know that you're not alone. 44% of people are stressed at work, and this is not normal. There's something extremely wrong with our workplaces today. Today, workers around the world are more stressed than ever. Gallup conducted a survey. It found that 60% of workers are emotionally detached from their jobs. 60%, 60. 19% workers said they're miserable at work. 57% said they're just about sailing through. They're neither engaged at work nor thriving at their jobs. Only 9% of workers said they're both thriving and engaged. And these are dangerous markers. They tell you that less than a tenth of the global workforce today is satisfied and prospering. Less than a tenth. What's happening to the rest? To the majority? They're mostly burnt out. Indeed conducted a survey in 2021. It found 52% of respondents experiencing burnout. This matches the latest survey. That says 44% of workers reported daily stress at work in 2021. The year before, in 2020, the number was 42%. The situation was not good back then either, but it's getting worse by the day. Which is why it's important that we ask relevant questions. For starters, what is making employees so stressed? Number one is deadlines. Today, they are tighter than ever, and we've normalized it. Be it working extra hours or on holidays, we have to meet deadlines. Number two, a lot of workers today are overwhelmed. There's just too much work and just a handful of people capable of shouldering it. Number three, many workers say they're doing work they were not even supposed to, or they don't like, and saying no is not an option. Our work culture has villainized that word. You can't say no. More often than not, the workplace itself becomes a stressor. The workplace becomes toxic. People are gossiping, the boss is playing favorites, or is abusive. Most work stories have one of the above. Today, employees are told it's okay to work extra hours, it's okay to burn the midnight oil. A bad boss is not a big deal. That answering calls and emails late into the night is a sign of being responsible, hands-on. Today, not taking a holiday is a sign of being a good employee in a lot of places. Well, it's not. And if we are to combat work stress, we must rewrite these toxic codes of employee conduct. In a world where top CEOs advocate longer work hours, longer working weeks, where business leaders lobby against remote working, these numbers, this data on work stress should be an eye-opener. A carrot and stick approach is a thing of the past. If you practice it, your workforce will be drained. We're staring at a mammoth problem today. It's a situation where every second person you meet at work is stressed. And this is not something you can afford to brush aside. And I will tell you why. You see, work stress takes a toll on your life outside work too. It affects you physically, emotionally, behaviorally. If you're stressed at work, your energy levels drop, your productivity drops, your alertness drops. Stress at work makes it difficult for you to pay attention to what's happening around you. It makes you prone to accidents. It makes you less tolerant as an individual. Now here's a question. Should employers care? More than anything else, I'd say. Because when an employee is stressed, her work suffers too. When 44% of your workforce is stressed and 60% is detached, your output is going to drop. Work stress or burnout is an occupational phenomenon. Here, an employee's experience at work affects her time at office and outside. And it's not the other way around. So the ball to combat work stress is in the court of managers and business leaders. They must cultivate a stress-free work environment, one that's free of toxicity, where hard work is recognized. Leaders must push for flexible working. Human resources departments must prioritize employee well-being, not punch-in, punch-out timings. These are little things that can make a big difference. These are little things that can improve both employee well-being and work output. It's only Tuesday. Lots of food for thought. We're wrapping the show, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
बचपन जिंदगी में सिर्फ एक बार आता है, उसे खुल के जीने दो, दाग लगने दो। दीवारों पर लगाए ना बर्जर इजी क्लीन पेंट, नो दाग नो धब्बा, ओनली ब्यूटीफुल वॉल्स।
अरे गया नहीं अभी तक? गाड़ी की सर्विस कब से ड्यू है यार? ये थोड़ी जाएंगे कहीं, ये तो गाड़ी की सर्विस करवाने के लिए कहीं जाने की जरूरत नहीं है। चिल, कोई गड़बड़ नहीं है। गो मैकेनिक पर पाए एक्सपर्ट कार सर्विसेज, 50 पॉइंट इंस्पेक्शन और 3 महीने की अनकंडीशनल वारंटी। डाउनलोड करें इंडिया का नंबर 1 कार सर्विसेज ऐप गो मैकेनिक।
गो मैकेनिक। जो मैला ना हो रंगों में वो क्या बचपन है, जो झूमे ना उमंगों में वो क्या बचपन है। बचपन जिंदगी में सिर्फ एक बार आता है, उसे खुल के जीने दो, दाग लगने दो। दीवारों पर लगाए ना बर्जर इजी क्लीन पेंट, इसके क्रॉस लिंकिंग पॉलीमर से नो दाग नो धब्बा, ओनली ब्यूटीफुल वॉल्स।
因为这个是我们华人的一个传统嘛，